carefully went through them. You can see I've made notes of my answers. And I thought perhaps if I went live with my answers, there might be other people out there who might be interested in what we do and how we do it. And these questions might give them some answers. So, hello Teri. I hope you're going to be able to see this later. I don't know if you can see it live, but maybe later. And I'm just going to go through these questions. They're all based on this book, The Flower Farmers, which I wrote some years ago now. And so my answers perhaps are more developed than they were when I wrote the book. But I will try not to be too long about it, because anybody who's been on one of our workshops, the list of workshops is on our website. We have many workshops, both online and physical, thanks to lockdown finally lifting slowly. We start having physical workshops here again from mid-May, all through the summer. But then meanwhile we have masses of online workshops to keep us all entertained and learning new things between now and the end of the summer term. So have a look and book yourself a treat. You may change your life. You too could be a flower farmer. Anyway, or anything else. So I'm going to read these questions. The first one is, I would love a book on colour for flower farmers. Well, I tell you what, if you can find it, there is a brilliant book called The Colour Garden by a couple called Pope. Their surname is Pope. And they used to garden in the walled garden at Hadsburn House many years ago. And they had the most fantastic garden, which was all laid out like a colour wheel. So I would get hold of that book if you can and have a look at that, because it's very, very inspiring for colour. Somebody said, I was also paying money for your diary. Well, you're in luck. We have an online workshop called The Flower Farmers Year, and I think the next one is something like the 5th of May, and it's 5 o'clock in the afternoon, British summertime, which will be about 11 o'clock in the morning, Pacific Coast time, and lunchtime if you're on the East Coast in America, and anywhere else I have no idea. And then that workshop, I go through my diary and I give you the dates for what I do when, the whole thing. How do I estimate how many flowers a plant will give me that season? I say I'll need 250,000 stems, and you plan that out, but how? Do you have a list of how many flowers you can count on per plant? Well, I'm a great believer in working with ballpark figures. So my first question is how many bouquets I'm going to sell and how many weddings and events am I going to supply flowers for in a year. And the answer to that is about 2,000 bouquets by courier, fair few more being picked up, click and collect here, and all the in normal times we do between 50 and 60 weddings and events in a year. And I know ballpark how many stems go into each of those bouquets, each of those events, workshops here. So I can work out how many I need to grow, and I work back from how many stems I need to grow. A very ballpark figure is that I work out that I'm going to get something like 5 flowers per plant per week when the plant is at its most productive. And I work from that. But I can work pretty much, it's not to the stem, obviously, and there's a little bit of wastage. But I try very hard not to make sure there's not too much wastage, because otherwise I am feeding my compost heap and not my children. Very important. If they sell roses with own root, is that better? I think you mean, is it better to plant bare root roses? And the answer, I think, is yes. For a start, they'll be much cheaper. But secondly, you can plant them in the winter, so long as you're not too cold and frozen. But you can plant them in the winter and they will have time to get their roots down and settle during the winter. They're much cheaper than potted roses. If the question means, it could mean another thing. The question could mean, is it better to buy roses on their own rootstock? And the chances are you won't be able to do that. Roses are nearly always grafted rootstock. So you've got a very good, strong rootstock that sends out nice, deep roots into the ground. And then the grower will graft another stem onto the original rootstock. So the rootstock gives good, strong base, and then the grafted stem is the stem that flowers. Does that make sense? I hope. It's a good idea to do bare roots anyway. Don't use hammers on lilac stems, somebody's put with a question mark. Never use a hammer at all. No hammers. That's so 1950s. If I'm cutting woody stems, not just lilac, but any woody stems, then I cut early in the morning. I take a bucket of water to the plant, so I'm cutting straight, more or less straight into water, and I will snip at an angle, the sharp angle, so that I'm snipping the biggest area of cellular plant material for the plant to drink up, and I will then cut up the stem, up the middle of it, cleanly with a pair of scissors, again to increase the cellular drinking cells that can be touched by the water. I never smash anything with any hammers unless I'm very cross with my husband. No, I don't do that either, even when I'm cross with him. Is garden grit just sand? No, it's grit. Short answer. But it's like gravel. I mean, it's the same, grind it down a bit and it'll become sand. How many flushes of roses do you get in a growing year? I thought very hard about this. I think the answer is 3. So I'll get the first flush end of May, beginning of June. They will all flower again properly. I mean, I get lots of roses from the end of May to the end of July, but I guess they'll give me one major flush and then they keep on flowering. Then I get one more flush and then they have a little rest in August and then they give me another big flush in September. I hope that's a good answer. Could you return a tulip bulb and leaves back to the soil after the tulip is cut off so that it might be usable the next year? Yeah, but why? I mean, life is very short. Tulip bulbs are not very expensive. And tulips the second year and onwards tend to be, hello, Michelle from Michigan. Oh my goodness, and look, here are people. And Nick, you're having supper with Mum. Hello, Dot. I dig up my tulip bulbs and they go on the compost heap because for me, here in Somerset, they're not very expensive to buy again next year. Plus, I don't know about you, but my taste changes. So while this year I may want lots of red and pink, hot colours for my tulips, next year I might want creams and greens and sort of paler colours. And if you are growing your tulips, the first year you plant them, you'll get really, really big heads and really, really tall stems. Every year after that, they tend to shrink a little bit and the heads are a bit smaller, which is fine if we're just naturalising them in the garden. So, if you want to naturalise them in the long grass, then that's fine. But if you want them to cut them and sell them for large sums of money, then I recommend new bulbs. Moving on. If you succession plant and the newest planted section blooms first, what would that be? Very good question. So, if you sow seeds in a tray and you take a little while to prick them out, and then you take a little while to pot them on, and at any point in that process, your little seedlings become root bound, then you will slow them down. They really hate that. So I may be wrong, but I suggest that what's happened is somebody has direct sown straight into the soil some seed, and it's loved it. The seed, the ground is warm, there's been plenty of rain, the seed's germinated quickly, got its root down, nothing has come along to slow it down, and they've quickly grown up and flowered. Whereas if you have sown in trays, and they've been pricked out, and they've been potted on, and they've finally been planted out, every time that pricking out or potting on process kind of stalls the plant a little bit and slows it down a week or two. And that is why you might get direct sown flowers flowering before the potted ones have even really got going. which is why I hedge my bets and I do some direct sown and some in pots, because then I've got everything in case. Is there a good way to take flowering branches from a tree for the tree's sake? Yes, absolutely. Every time you cut a branch or a twig or any cut from a tree, cut so that you're cutting underneath the stem. Does that make sense? Sorry, I'm wearing my husband's jumper on my neck because it's so cold. So cut under the stem, because if this is the stem, then when the rain lands on the stem, it's not going to get into the wound and get it wet. But also, yes, that sort of protects it. That's what I think. That's not a scientifically proven fact. And I have done no horticultural training, so I'm sure somebody will come along and say that's wrong. But it works for me. What are some of the plants that produce the most while using the least space? Sweet peas. Anything that really flowers again and again and again and again and again on the same plant. So maybe sweet peas. But they work very well for me because we have warm but not boiling hot summers and cool but not freezing cold winters. So have a think about that, whether that works for you. That's really unhelpful, I think. But I think that does really depend on where you are and what your local condition, your geographical conditions are. Are there some plants that we should just stay away from because they're too toxic or troublesome? I would say yes. I would stay far away from aconitum, monkshood. It is deadly poisonous. If you get it in a cut in your own finger, you may end up in hospital or worse, dead. So while there are lots of poisonous plants, I do grow lots of foxgloves, for example. They are not gonna, she says, hoping, they're not as, monkshood is really, really poisonous. Foxglove is poisonous, and I wouldn't put foxgloves in a flower girl's posy, for example, for a wedding. I would never put it anywhere near food. And I might not put it much in DIY buckets either. I'd be a little bit wary, and I'd make sure I told the person I was selling the flowers to, if they were going to touch the foxgloves, that the foxgloves were poisonous and they should watch out. But otherwise, I do use foxgloves quite a lot, and they are quite poisonous, but I don't use the dreaded monkshood. And when we came here, there was monkshood all over the garden, and we dug it out and got rid of it quick. Top 10 long-lasting flowers. That's a really nasty question. It depends where you are. It depends how hot it is. Depends how well the plant has been looked after. Depends how open the flower is when you cut it. It depends how clean the water is that the flower lives in. It depends. However, maybe the question could be turned around, and the answer is look at everlasting flowers like acroclinum and straw flowers, which actually work brilliantly in cut flower arrangements. I tend to use them more in the summer. There are none left by the time the dried flower season comes along. Plus, I'm not a huge fan of dried flowers, and I know there's a big fashion for them, so people are loving their dried flowers at the moment, but I feel as though they're summer flowers, and by the end of the summer, I'm really over them. But I use them in my bouquets and arrangements a lot, and they do last and last and last. And I think they're fantastic to grow. The colours are lovely, and I love the sort of slightly crunchy feel of the petals. So that's very good. Moving on. Which flower should we let fully open before cutting? Very few is the answer to that. I wouldn't let much open fully before cutting. Umbellifers are good if you leave them. They'll hold their flowers well if you leave them before you cut. But the more ripe the flower heads, the more they shed pollen. Personally, I'm a big fan of cutting things when they're not quite open, almost everything, because I want my customer to have the vase life. I don't particularly, I'd rather the flower developed in their vases. And there's another question about flower food and flower preservative, and I don't use any of that stuff. And I think if you don't use any silver nitrate or any kind of flower food, which I don't, then if you cut the flower straight into water and you never let it really out of water the whole time, it never really notices that it's been cut. And that way, so long as you keep the water clean and the vase that the flowers are in clean, and you explain this to your customers so that they know to do the same, then the flowers should last quite a nice long time, and they will develop in the vase and they'll grow in the vase. I mean, I have had customers. I had a lady ring me last summer and say that the flowers I sent her mother for her 50th wedding anniversary or something had lasted for 3 weeks, and they were in May, and 3 weeks is really quite a long time for a bunch of flowers with no flower food, no silver nitrate or anything, no preservative. But the thing is that the lady who'd received them really loved her garden flowers, and so she had really looked after them, and she really had given them a fresh vase every day, and had given them clean water every day, and had snipped the stems. And yes, she had deadheaded the bouquet, but it was still going all those weeks later. And I think that's our challenge, is to educate our customers a little bit. Rather than let them demand forever lasting flowers, we must say, well, these were grown in my garden and they won't like chemicals. So you can't have them unless you're going to look after them. Anything I grow in shade, helleborus, lots of helleborus. Actually, quite a lot of things. I grow Telema grandiflora, which is a lovely wildflower. I grow some cowslips, some euphorbia. I'm staring at the ceiling as I'm trying to imagine my shady bed, but it's mostly helleborus. Where do I go for inspiration or discover new flowers? I love walking around gardens. So any chance I get, I go and walk around other people's gardens and make mental notes. Ooh, take photographs. Ooh. Or I look at my friends' photographs and I go, what's that? I want some of that. Or I go around my friends' gardens with a plastic bag that I've sprayed the inside of and a pair of scissors. Ooh, I'll just have a cutting. What kind of marking will last and not wash off? Sharpie on painter's tape. I think you mean plant labels. The awful truth is I've given up on them completely. They don't work. They, as you say, the writing always disappears. What I do on my seed trays is I write. My daughter was given some really smart, they're like watercolour pencils, which are really thick, kind of greasy crayony, lovely. So I borrow one of those and I write on the side of the seed trays. And this year, that's this year's trick. And so far, the writing has stayed because obviously I water my trays from underneath. So they are all fine. Once my seedlings get to a certain height, I kind of know what everything is. And I've got the order of the seeds to look back on if I don't know which variety of clary sage or whatever it is. I need to check, but I don't label outside at all anymore. I just ended up with white plastic labels all over the place being chopped up by the mower. It was a mess. Is there a best resource for trustworthy information on plants? So many conflict. Absolutely true. And of course you must pay attention to where you live and your own, climatic conditions. But I believe very strongly that the RHS website is absolutely second to none for all sorts of information. So that's where I would go. That's the Royal Horticultural Society. Obviously, you guys across the pond may think that the Royal Horticultural Society is a sort of rare and weird old organisation, but actually it has a really fantastic website and it will tell you all about plants, how to germinate, how to propagate, how to look after things. And I wonder if there's a similar organisation in America that might have such good information. You do not have to be a member of the Royal Horticultural Society to look up their website. Obviously, it is a good thing to be a member because it's a marvellous organisation. Moving on. Do I have a secret weapon flower? For bashing people over the head with. I think my secret weapon are my weeds. I was thinking about this and I was thinking, what shall I say is my secret weapon? I unexpectedly good weeds, for example, dock. brilliant seed heads. Anything with tall and exciting seed heads, I love to cut. And because we have such a lot of wild area here, I do cut my dock. I don't know if you have dock in America, but I also grow in my beds as a crop what my mother calls it New Zealand dock, and it's a red orac. Fantastic foliage and stunning seed heads. So have a look for red orac. Is for a great, anything seed heady, I think is a very lovely texture and structure in a bouquet. Are there creative places to grow when you think you have no room left? I love that. Well, if you've got any leftover crates or anything, you can always use those. I think the skill is to be prepared to fill up spaces as things go over. So have some seedlings ready, and when your spring crops are really past their best, whip them out and get the next crop in. And if you have a nice long season, I appreciate that some of you in America have quite short seasons. But if you have a long enough season, then yeah, be ready with plants to fill up a gap. Moving on, what do you think of flower preservatives? Not much. I never use them, and I would never buy them. I don't use anything in the water, nothing here. I just don't see the point. I think if you're growing flowers for sale, these are for me, I'm growing garden flowers, and they will last, if they're looked after, they last 5 days. So why would I need to add? That's what I guarantee. I think 5 days, and most of them last longer than 5. So, and that's what you would get guaranteed anywhere else. So skip the flower preservatives. Oh, I've disappeared. I'm going to. Oh, my. That's very odd. Here I am, back again. Moving on. Another question for Georgie. Talks about cutting roses and says she cuts the thorns off with scissors. I do. I've never seen it done that way, and it seems it would be time consuming. It is. Could she explain more about it? So, what I do, and I'm sure there are quicker ways of doing it, but I have tried quicker ways, and they never worked for me, really. So, when I cut my rose, I'm quite quick about it. Say I cut a rose stem here. Okay, here. And it's got, 5 or 6 thorns. It is quite quick. And I either flip them off with my thumb, or if they're a bit hard, I'll snip them off with scissors. And if they're very thorny, like something like Gertrude Jekyll, I don't grow very thorny roses, to be fair. I do have Gertrude Jekyll, so I'll cut her into I make a sort of skirt with my apron, a basket with my apron, and I'll cut her into my apron, pop her in a bucket. It's quite hard to do though, because I'm not wearing gloves or anything. And then I'll bring her back and I'll strip her with some quite thick linen. It works quite well as a stripping way. But I don't know. Really, I use scissors. I do. It's slow. That's why roses are expensive, because they take so long to cut. More. How long do the fresh flower wreaths last? Well, I've given up using floral foam, and I think in the book there's a bit of floral foam action. But I've given it up now because obviously we're trying to save the planet. And if I make one in moss, it'll last several days, not forever, but certainly long enough to do a wedding or an event or a funeral even. And I happen to be doing a mossed wreath demo, if ever you feel like joining in, on I think it's Friday, 3 Fridays away. Have a look on the website on the calendar for the workshops, and if you fancy coming along, I'll see you there. Who are my flower farmer mentors, and of whom is she a fan? Well, I tell you who I think. Obviously, I'm an enormous fan of the patron saint of wonderful florists, Gertrude. Constance Spry, who is a marvellous inspiration for anybody who likes to wear a string of pearls at the weekend. And actually, I think hats off to Sarah Raven, because she really I think there are a lot of people who are growing flowers, certainly in this country now, because she really started people growing annuals and sort of bright cutting garden flowers again, when perhaps they'd fallen rather out of fashion. And she sort of took the gardening world, and this is 20 years ago, she took the gardening world by storm and shook everybody up and said, grow some blooming flowers. And I'm sure that's where a lot of my original inspiration came from. And so hats off to Sarah. And do have a look at her website. She does amazing things. Have you taken any flower farmer classes? No. I never had any money when I started out. And so I had to learn on the job. But that sounds disingenuous. I really, if there had been classes I could have taken, I would have done. But I read masses. I read everything I could get hold of. And the two books for me that really were kind of the books I probably wouldn't be doing this if I hadn't read them, are Lynn Brzezinski's The Flower Farmer. Hats off. It's a great book. Very, very straightforward, uncomplicated, can do, makes you see very clearly how to make your life work. The reason my beds are long, thin beds with grass paths between are because I was copying her. And actually it works very well. And the other book I really recommend incredibly highly, it's an unbelievably good read, is a book called Gilding the Lily, about the history or about the international cut flower trade. And off the top of my head, I cannot remember the author's name, which is shocking. But she's a great girl, and it's an absolutely fascinating read. And it'll tell you so much about the international cut flower trade, and it'll inform the way that you speak to your customers. It'll inform the way that you choose to grow. It's very, very unjudgmental. It's absolutely fact. And I think it's fascinating. So have a look at Gilding the Lily. And I'm sure a lot of you know Lynn Brzezinski's book. It's absolutely brilliant book. Has she taken any flower farmer classes? No. What books? We've done that. Oh my gosh, there's a whole page. Okay, we'll keep going. What are some plants you recommend planting over daffodils if you're naturalising? An orchard. Is that helpful? They want to be shaded out over the summer so they don't dry out. This year I'm planting my sweet peas over mine. Last year I let thistles grow over them to feed the birds. Lots of options there. Stem length. Can you give us tips for getting long stems? Feed, nitrogen feed. On which point we carry on. Any suggestions for a substitute for stinging nettle in your compost tea? No. But I don't know what you have in America that's a nitrogen-rich weed that you could use. But if you have a nitrogen-rich weed that will rot down quickly in water, then I suggest that would be a good thing to do. And the rest of that question is how to keep the stinging nettle from spreading everywhere on the farm. I don't know. That's the answer. Don't let it set seed. Keep cutting the tops off. But I don't know whether it's a pernicious weed in America, but here it is a pernicious weed. But without it, we have no butterflies. So we must have butterflies. And so I have large sprays of nettles for my butterflies. Can you, or someone who has the book, share the compost tea recipe again? Yes, can someone on the book, if you've got the book, someone share the compost tea recipe. It's not complicated and it works. To be honest, I use less and less of that sort of homemade tea stuff because I am using an amazing compost from a company called Dalefoot, which obviously is no good for you people in America. But it has cut my watering. It's so good. It's cut my watering and my feeding regime down dramatically. Is there anything you would do differently if you were starting all over again? Oh yes, I would have laid out my patch in 3 patches instead of 4, because I would then have 3. I'd have spring, summer, and autumn. There you go, 3. Spring, summer, autumn, rather than having 4 patches. So I've got uncomfortable mixes everywhere, and I walk too far. Much easier to put it like that. Here, everything is laid out very, very badly because we're so green, and the eco thing is very, very important. My husband would divorce me if we didn't have large swathes of wild and nettles and trees and things. So I spend all day dragging my trolley through wild patches. It's not very well organised. I would do it better. If you don't have coolers, what's the best way to keep blooms in buckets? We don't have coolers, but it doesn't get especially hot. For us, I think it's, okay, I don't know how to do this in American temperatures, but it's the hottest it's ever got is 35 here. I don't know what that makes in American temperatures. And the coldest it really ever gets is -6. And again, I don't know what that makes in American temperatures. And I work in this barn, which is got thick stone walls and isn't particularly flooded by sunlight. So it's a very good, cool place to keep flowers. But I haven't got a cooler, but I guess if you're hot, you must have a cooler. I don't know how you would do it otherwise, unless you could, you know, your dreams, you could dig down into the ground and build a green, turfed roofed sort of cellar. But I don't know. I'm afraid I can't. I'm not good on coolers. If you only had one season to farm, what would you pick and why? I probably would pick high summer, sort of dahlia time, on account of the dahlias. I love a dahlia. Or do you call them dahlias? Dahlias. I wouldn't be without my dahlias. So if I could only grow for one patch of the year, I would go for the dahlia patch. And then, if you could only grow 5 to 7 flowers, what would they be? That's an impossible question. I would grow dahlias, I would grow roses, I would grow sweet peas. Those are 3. I would always grow lace. What I think of is shapes. I grow spikes, lace, daisy shapes, accent flowers. Varieties, it doesn't really help thinking about varieties. So I find varieties to fit the shapes. Does that make sense? You mentioned trends and what the market wants. What do you see as the emerging trends and what's becoming passe? I tell you what's the emerging trend. The emerging trend is being eco. The flower industry worldwide has caught up with the fact that the planet is in trouble. And having been a surprisingly not eco industry, the flower industry is suddenly kind of going, actually, we better grow flowers that will feed the bees. So let's not grow sunflowers that have no pollen. What's the point? Let's feed the bees. Let's not grow monoculture because let's feed the bees. Let's not use too much plastic. Let's not use flower foam. All of that sort of thing. Let's be greener, and then we can make a contribution to the planet not exploding in the next 10 years. Well, it may go ahead, but you know, at least we can feel good about ourselves because we have fed the bees in the meantime. And I think that is a really, really strong trend. There's a huge amount of sustainable floristry going on. There are books on sustainable floristry mechanics. And I think if you're flower farmers, and particularly small scale flower farmers, are really expected by their customers not to be spraying everything with vast amounts of chemicals or sort of ruining the earth in order to produce flowers. I know I'm talking fast. When did you start outsourcing some of the non-flower related work of being a business, accounting, social media, etc.? Well, immediately with the website, because I can't do websites. Social media, I have always done really 80-90% of the social media myself because I like it. Then the accounting, I was always rubbish at the accounting. So as soon as I could, I was your classic business who had a bag full of receipts at the end of its first year, thinking, now what do I do? And because I didn't know how to do it, and I didn't want to get into trouble with the tax man, so I found a bookkeeper who 10 years later is still my bookkeeper and is really fantastic. So as soon as I could afford to outsource the things I simply couldn't do, and accounting I simply can't. I just can't do that. And a website, I knew I needed a website. And to be fair, we wasted quite a lot of money. We're now on our 4th website in 10 years, 11 years. But I think the one we now have is a good one for the moment. But I have no doubt that things will change and we will get a new website in another couple of years. It's as expensive as running a shop. It is running a shop. And I know that for website, I'm not somebody who can sit down and design a website, even though websites have become much more user-friendly in the last 11 years. I'd still be a bit wary, and I would have somebody do it for me. So I have to save that money, safe in the knowledge that in 2 years' time I'm going to probably spend that money on a new website. Moving on. Can you plant on top of all bulbs? And which are the ones you can? Yes, you can plant on top of all bulbs, but I wouldn't plant on top of bulbs that you're going to replace every year. So I leave my narcissi in the ground, and I can plant on top of them if I want, so long as the narcissi I can get through all right to flower the next spring. But my tulips I will lift and get rid of because I'll have something new next year. What are your best tips for pest management? Garden organically. Full stop. That's not really helpful, is it? But I know from long experience that we've been here for 17 years and we've been gardening organically for 17 years. And when we came here, there were no wildflowers. The field, it was a big empty field, was ryegrass for feeding cattle. It had been sprayed and sprayed and sprayed over the years with pesticides, and it was in a really, really bad state. And 17 years later, we have 35 plus different kinds of wildflowers. We have, you can watch the food chain working all the way down. And my husband's ethos is look after the invertebrates and the rest of the food chain will look after itself. And so we have green fly, but we also and we have black fly, and we have, I don't know, the equivalent kinds of pests that you might have in America, but we have all those pernicious, vicious, nasty pests, slugs, vast amounts of slugs. But we also have hedgehogs and toads that eat the slugs. And I remember somebody posted an amazing bit of film of a beetle, which was smaller than a slug, dragging the slug away to eat it. So if you have piles of rotting wood, you will have beetles. And if you have beetles, you've got to let the food chain exist. And sometimes I'm out there very early in the morning in the summer, and I watch the barn owl hunting the meadow. And so the barn owl is hunting the mice, for which we leave tufty grass. The mice are eating the small insects and the beetles. The beetles are eating the slugs. It's a whole thing. And I'm afraid that's the way to garden. And it takes time. But once you get there, you have this sort of, you can see it's like an orchestra working, and you can sort of stand there and listen to the noise. And the noise is fantastic. It's an orchestra of birds, a huge choir of birds singing. It's amazing. So it's really worth doing. Plant a wood. If you've got space, plant a wood, and then you can have lots of birds, and they'll eat. Eat. Are the sturdy? No. Do you have a go-to bouquet of flowers that sells quickly for you? No. Because I sell everything in advance. So you order from the website, so you see sort of what you're getting. Obviously, no two bouquets are the same, but you can see sort of what you're getting. And because our bouquets are all seasonal, this week's won't look the same as next week's, won't look the same as the next week's. You order in advance. Luckily, the customers by now know that they don't know what they're getting. It'll be a seasonal look. And that's happy days. So no, I don't have a particular bouquet of something that I go to sell. But we don't do gate sales, or I don't go to market or anything like that. We're just online. If I did gate sales or went to market, then I probably would have a different thing. Does that make sense? Are the sturdy seed trays not dishwasher proof? My dishwasher is really hot. and would melt them. They're not strong enough. Also, my husband would shoot me for getting earth into the dishwasher and probably in the drains, and then he'd have to rod the drains. So I'm not doing that. Can I grow ranunculus indoors as it's too warm here in South Oregon? Is it South Oregon? In my head, Oregon is cold still. What do I know? I don't know is the answer. I should think you would have wanted to get your ranunculus in a little earlier, but my spring is really, you can feel it, is really coming now in March. And my ranunculus will be flowering in my tunnel in about 3 weeks. And I started them in cells in November. So it depends on your season, is the answer to that question. And if the ground is still frozen, then you'll have to have them in the tunnel. But if it's warm enough, get them outside maybe. The awful thing. The lovely America is so enormous. It's not the same from one side to the other. Heated cables are a thing. Yes, they are. Yeah, just look online, heated cables, and you'll find them. And you can order them and you can make your sandbox. Where to look for unused varieties of flowers to set ourselves apart? Books. Instagram. Instagram's great for finding things that you didn't know were there. Stalk all the other flower farmers and see what they're growing. You don't have to follow them. You don't have to talk to them. Just have a look. Again, I think it's really important to not ask whether a flower is good for cutting. If you really like the look of it, the chances are it is good for cutting. And if you plant it, you can cut it. And I think we all grow the obvious things. But it is our perennials and our shrubs that sort of set us apart from one another. So maybe if you find something, if you see something you like the look of in a book or in a garden, if you're walking around a garden and you really like it, often a garden will have plants for sale. Treat yourself to the thing that you really find very attractive and try it. The only thing, I grow a lot of things here which are not accepted as, are not usually used for cut flowers, but nothing here is sacred. I'll cut anything. The only thing I haven't been able to make stand in water is acanthus leaves in 11 years. Everything else will cut. And I don't really care what my garden looks like. I'm interested in what is in the vase. So I think that's a way of finding unusual varieties, is to not always look at the cut flower options. See what else there is. Would ducks destroy the flowers in the yard? I think they would. I see pictures of other people's flower fields full of running ducks gallivanting around, and they look very attractive, but I would be wary. I'd have little, if I were going to do work like that, I would have little movable fences that I could put the ducks in, and they could maybe clear a bed or two of slugs and pests, and then I could move them, but they wouldn't be able to get out of that fenced area for fear that they would dig up my seedlings. No, we have no, I used to have chickens, and I always fancied ducks, but we never had them. And the fox kept getting the chickens. And after a while, you lose heart, really. What are some cows that cut flowers that have shallow roots? I don't know. Possibly anything that doesn't mind drought. Is that a good answer? Have a look at things that don't mind a lack of water. But if you have not very much topsoil, you can make raised beds by adding topsoil or compost or both, and then your plants can have deeper roots without getting into trouble. Have a raised bed. What might we grow in tulip crates? Do they just line those with paper on the bottom? I don't line mine. To be honest, I don't use them much. But I think there are lots of things you can grow in tulip crates. Next year, because I don't grow tulips in my tulip crates, but I have crates, I think I'm going to grow those little Iris sibirica, you know, the little very early iris, and they're only about this high. But of course, in the same way with all other bulbous material, you plant them. So say there's my iris, then actually, if I pull him out, I'm going to get another couple of inches of stem, and wouldn't they be pretty? And I'm going to put them very closely together in my crates and see if I can have 500 for my early bouquets. Wouldn't that be gorgeous? Those lovely blues and purples. I think so. And that is the end of the questions. So I really hope you have enjoyed yourselves. I really hope you have enjoyed the Flower Farmers Year. I hope to see some of you on workshops online, if not in person, over the next few months. We have just listed our workshops for the rest of the spring and to the end of the summer term. So there are lots and lots of things to do, learn, see, experience. And I hope that this has been helpful and useful. And now I have to work out how to save it and not lose this thing. Here we go. Been very nice to talk to you all. I hope it's been helpful. Okay, save, action. I'm going to go down like this. Oh, here we go. And I'm going to save, or end it even. This may go on some time. Oh. No. Okay, I'm going to finish the live. Okay, forgive me. All go and have a supper. Ignore me now because I've got to work out how to do this, and it's all, since it's live, it's going to film me doing it. How do I finish it? Okay, click. No. 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 Help! End. Oh, there it is. Big thing saying end live video.